behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy.
Folks, let's talk about 3 milestones that took the name J.D. Vance from the hardscrabble hills of Appalachia to the heart of American power. He's been a Marine veteran, a best-selling author with Hillbilly Elegy, and a rising star in politics with a blunt, no-nonsense style. But here's the twist: when he stepped into the divisive world of politics, J.D. faced the criticism that's dogged him most. He once publicly opposed Donald Trump, only to later become vice president in the very administration Trump led. A man who saw himself as an outsider to the elite is now sitting at the highest level of the power structure, a champion of the working class, yet a politician sparking plenty of debate. So, what drove a kid who used to hide under the bed, scared of his mother's breakdowns, to walk straight into the eye of the storm? Folks, let's dive into the story of J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, a man with millions of dollars in real estate and seen as a symbol of America's working class. But here's something not everyone knows as a kid. He grew up surrounded by addiction and violence, hiding under the bed when his mother's episodes flared up. How does a boy raised without a father, without peace, climb to the pinnacle of American politics? J.D. Vance was born in 1984 in Middletown, Ohio, a once thriving industrial town. By the 1990s, the factories had shut down, jobs vanished, and with them went the hope of an entire community. J.D. grew up in a family full of cracks. His parents divorced early. His mother, once a nurse, spiraled into addiction and cycled through boyfriends. Strange men came and went, leaving behind instability, violence, and a constant sense of fear in their small home. From a young age, J.D. learned he couldn't count on anyone. Some days, he cooked his own meals. Some nights, he huddled under the bed to escape the sounds of crashing and shouting from the living room, while his peers went on summer vacations or played video games. J.D. scavenged used books from thrift stores and soaked up lessons from his grandmother, the one person who gave him a sense of safety. Mama, his grandmother, was a fiery Scots-Irish woman, tough but full of love. She didn't have much education or money, but she had something the world around J.D. lacked: faith in the future. She told him stories of ancestors who crossed the Appalachian Mountains with nothing but their grit, and she drilled into him that poverty was no excuse for giving up. At 17, J.D. faced a crossroads, a moment where one wrong choice could have trapped him in Middletown forever, like so many others in his working-class neighborhood. But that teenage boy chose a different path, and from there, the real journey of J.D. Vance began. Folks, the real journey of J.D. Vance began with a decision that left his family stunned, joining the Marine Corps at 19, from a boy who hid under the bed to escape violence. He now chose to step onto battlefields, carrying a heavy past and a quiet promise: if he survived, he wouldn't let his life slip by without meaning. What happened in the deserts of Iraq that made a young Appalachian soldier start dreaming of Yale and the political stage? In 2003, J.D. Vance enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. A young man raised amid addiction and chaos now stood in the ranks of the military, embracing discipline, structure, and a belief in something bigger than himself. His family was shocked, his friends bewildered, but for J.D., this wasn't just duty, it was an escape. For the first time, he had the power to shape his own future. 2 years later, J.D. was deployed to Iraq as a combat correspondent for his unit. One July afternoon, while drafting a short report, the air raid siren blared. His comrades rushed to bunkers. J.D. sat frozen, hands stiff, staring at the dusty red sky in the distance. In that fragile moment, he thought, if I make it through today, I'm going to live differently. When he returned, J.D. started over. He enrolled at Ohio State University and graduated with honors in just 2 years, a feat few achieve. Not long after, he was accepted into Yale Law School, a world far removed from his roots. There, people spoke in phrases J.D. had never heard. They wore tailored suits, while J.D. showed up in wrinkled shirts, driving a borrowed old car from his grandmother. He didn't talk much about where he came from, afraid others wouldn't understand, or worse, would judge him. But that very difference made J.D. realize something: there was a story yet to be told, the story of kids growing up in Appalachia, where no one taught them to dream big, and no one believed they could. After graduating, J.D. joined Mithril Capital, a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. He stepped into rooms with glass ceilings, digital boards, and multi-million-dollar deals sealed in minutes. But behind the handshakes was a cold unpredictability. JD faced dozens of rejections when pitching projects to help poor communities. Some called him an outsider, but that only fueled his drive to prove something sometimes, to change the system. You need someone who comes from the outside. Then, one evening in 2015, he sat down at his keyboard to pour out everything that had torn at his heart for decades. A book was born, but JD didn't yet know it would catapult him into fame, controversy, and the heart of American politics. Folks, it all started with a manuscript, a personal story written not for fame, but to understand why kids like JD Vance were so often left behind. Hillbilly Elegy hit shelves in 2016, right as America was deeply divided. No one expected a guy who once lived in a beat-up car in Ohio to become a voice the New York Times hailed as the key to understanding Trump's voters. Hollywood came knocking soon after. Netflix turned the book into a film starring Glenn Close and Amy Adams, From Words Scribbled in the Dark. JD earned hundreds of thousands of dollars in royalties and stepped into the world of media, fame, and influence for the first time. But here's what stands out: he didn't stop at the book. Soon after, JD co-founded Naria Capital with Peter Thiel and Eric Schmidt, raising over $90 million to invest in essentials like agriculture, healthcare, and tech for the working class. Within 3 years, JD Vance's name wasn't just on bookshelves, it was in the halls of Congress. In 2023, he was elected senator from Ohio. Just 2 years later, he took the oath as Vice President of the United States, a journey almost unbelievable when you look back at where he started. But behind the spotlight of his career, how has JD's everyday life changed? As a kid, JD Vance slept under the kitchen table when his mother locked her bedroom door in a drunken haze. That boy dreamed of a quiet, safe place to close his eyes without fear. Nearly 40 years later, he stands in a red brick mansion on Price Hill, one of Cincinnati, Ohio's oldest neighborhoods. The house, worth $1,400,000, was built in the early 20th century, with stained glass windows, handcrafted brick fireplaces, curved wooden staircases, and a walnut-floored library. On a low bookshelf against the main wall, JD keeps Hillbilly Elegy next to unpublished drafts. By the window, his faded Iraq-era Marine jacket hangs neatly on a rack. JD didn't choose the house for its address. He chose it for the sense of belonging he'd spent years chasing. A few months after becoming a senator, JD bought another home in Alexandria, Virginia, not far from the White House where most young politicians rent. But JD didn't rent. He purchased a home worth over $1,600,000. A neoclassical beauty with a white-painted facade and Greek-style arched doorways. Inside, it's simple wooden chairs, walls hung with Appalachian photographs, a kitchen with no wine rack but a shelf of his wife's cookbooks. This is where his 3 children studied online during the pandemic, and where JD stayed up late preparing for televised debates. JD once said, "I don't buy houses to show off, I buy them because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go." A third property, on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., is worth $590,000 and currently rented out. For others, it's an investment. For JD, it's a backup ticket, the same house he once rented as a law intern, now his own. None of these homes are ultra-modern. No pools, no elevators, no private staff. Because JD remembers living in apartments without hot water. He remembers wishing for someone stable enough to move just once. Now, he splits his life between 3 places: Ohio, Virginia, and D.C., like 3 versions of himself: a loyal grandson, a devoted father, and a young politician facing millions of eyes. Each morning, he steps out the door without a private driver or a fancy limousine. All he needs is a vehicle that's sturdy, reliable, and familiar, reminding him the journey's far from over. As vice president, JD Vance could travel by private jet, armored car, or a motorcade stretching a city block. But his choice is simpler, more personal than anyone might expect. The vehicle he's relied on for years is a black, armored Chevrolet Suburban. To others, it's a security necessity. To JD, it's something more, a keeper of memories he once shared. Back in the day, I'd beg rides from my mom's friends just to get to school and back in time to cook ramen for my sister. Now I don't need to ask anyone, but I'll never forget what it's like to wait for someone else to open the door. Inside the Suburban, there's no high-end leather or cutting-edge digital dashboard. The back seat holds his youngest child's car seat, a box of cereal, and a worn, thin Bible tucked in the door pocket from his Yale Law School days. A small decal on the rear windshield reads, "Mama always believed." Sometimes. JD drives himself not because he lacks a driver, but because it's the only time he's truly alone, in the car. He tunes into AM radio, skipping political podcasts for old country songs about the imperfect American dream. Rumors say he owns a Tesla Model S, a perk from his Silicon Valley investment days, but it's rarely, if ever, seen with him. Maybe JD doesn't want to be mistaken for a tech bro success story. He doesn't talk much about cars, but those who've ridden with him on the interstate recall how he buckles his kids' seatbelts himself, adjusts the rearview mirror, and checks with his wife to ensure they've packed enough snacks for the trip. In his childhood, moving meant loss. They relocated not by choice, but because they were evicted. Travel was about fleeing, not exploring. Maybe that's why, even with the power to ride in luxury, he sticks to a simple SUV not to flaunt where he's going, but to honor where he's been. What sets JD Vance apart isn't just what he owns, it's how he lives day to day. Amid a packed schedule, political battles, and public scrutiny, what does he seek in his private life? At 40, as vice president, JD's days start early, not with cabinet meetings, but with dropping his kids off at school. Despite a hectic schedule, he holds on to morning family time at 6:30. The alarm sounds by 7. He's brewing coffee, packing snacks for the kids, and checking their backpacks. No personal assistance for these tasks, just JD, in a slightly wrinkled shirt, savoring the quiet he dreamed of as a child. Lunch is often at the office or in meetings, but when he can, he eats at a family-run diner near the White House, where the menu hasn't changed in years. Pot roast, rye bread, iced tea. Some waitstaff there still remember him from his senator days. Evenings, if free from events, find JD reading or writing, sometimes a few journal lines, sometimes a draft chapter for an unfinished book, not for publication, but to keep himself grounded amid the whirlwind of power. He skips lavish galas, doesn't collect pricey watches, and doesn't golf on weekends. Instead, he jogs around his neighborhood, listens to old Reagan speeches, or plays recorded Bible verses. His spending is restrained. His main credit card is tied to a family fund, not personal use. Most book royalties go to Ohio community programs when he needs something for himself. He waits as if reminding himself nothing's urgent when you've lived without it your whole life. Even at the pinnacle of American power, JD holds on to the smallest things: an old ballpoint pen from Mama, a black and white photo of Middletown's steel mill gate, and lessons of resilience no school could teach. But what shows his priorities most isn't in personal habits, it's how he makes time for family. After meetings, trips, and tense TV debates, JD Vance always returns to three things: his wife, his kids, and memories of his grandmother. He's married to Usha Vance, an Indian-American lawyer and Yale classmate. Unlike typical political couples, they keep a low profile, steering clear of media and gossip. They have 3 children, whose names and faces are kept strictly private. No social media, no staged perfect family photos before elections. For JD, family isn't a photo op, it's the one safe haven he guards for himself. He tells his kids about Mama, the fierce woman with no college degree or wealth who taught him, "You don't have to be the best, just don't give up," on his DC desk. He keeps a handwritten letter from her, its slanted script ending with, "Always stand up for the ones no one sees." That line guides his community work. Though his Our Ohio Renewal Fund fell short of early hopes, JD still supports scholarships, veterans, and Appalachian youth programs. No flashy campaigns, no press conferences, just quiet donations and private talks with small schools, places he once wished someone would have listened to him. As vice president, he's spoken to millions, but what JD treasures most are evenings on the floor, reading to his kids in the voice Mama used to use. He grew up with no one to read him stories. Now, he shares his own, not to glorify it, but so kids like he was know they're not alone. But JD Vance's life isn't just warm lights and children's laughter. On his climb to power, he's weathered storms, and not everyone's been on his side. Folks, let's get into a story that stirred up plenty of talk. JD Vance once called Donald Trump dangerous and shameful, but just a few years later, he became one of Trump's closest allies. Was it a political awakening or the price of ambition when his past and his goals collided? JD had to choose: stick to his old image or step into the storm. Back in 2016, when Donald Trump launched his presidential campaign, J.D. Vance was one of the loudest critics in conservative circles. He publicly called Trump shameful and even compared him to Hitler in an interview. To many, J.D. was a rare voice of intellect and morality in a divided political landscape. But 5 years later, in 2021, J.D. announced his run for Senate as a Trump ally. He didn't just apologize publicly, he became one of the most loyal spokesmen for the MAGA movement. This sharp pivot left many of his early supporters feeling betrayed. The press dubbed him a savvy opportunist, and some old Yale classmates cut ties altogether. J.D. didn't deny the shift. On TV, he simply said, "I was wrong. And if I don't have the courage to change when I see I'm wrong, I don't deserve to represent anyone." But that was just the beginning. In 2024, amid rising immigration tensions in Ohio, J.D. claimed that Haitian immigrants were causing trouble and stealing pets. The statement sparked an immediate firestorm. Human rights groups, black community leaders, and international media condemned him for what they called discriminatory rhetoric. The controversy peaked when his office received bomb threats. Under pressure, J.D. held a press conference, standing firm on his views but calling for an end to violence. It didn't stop there. At the Munich Security Conference in 2025, he bluntly criticized Europe's immigration policies, saying they were so humane they're counterproductive and that Europe's brand of democracy is nurturing its own collapse. The room fell silent for a few seconds. The press called him a new generation Trump, but with a more intellectual tone. From someone who once shied away from debates, J.D. now strides into politics unafraid of being disliked. He's not always right, but he's no longer afraid of being wrong. Behind the controversies, J.D. started refining his approach. He spent more time meeting communities, listening to people share their struggles. In a speech in Appalachia, he said, "I'm not perfect, but I'm still fighting for the people this system forgot, just like it once forgot me." For older folks watching, it's clear nobody gets through life without missteps, but not everyone has the grit to stand up and keep going. So, what's J.D. Vance's legacy? Will he be remembered as a political opportunist or a symbol of a new conservative generation? Folks, can a boy raised in turmoil leave something lasting for the world? J.D. Vance doesn't call himself an inspiration, but for many in Appalachia, he's living proof that the American dream still exists small, fragile, but never fully extinguished. On the political stage, he's seen as a voice for a new conservative generation, fierce, unafraid of debate, yet deeply rooted in his origins. J.D. doesn't outtalk others with eloquence. He speaks from experience. When he addresses family breakdown, he's lived it. When he talks about educational opportunity, he's overcome prejudice to step into Yale. He founded our Ohio Renewal to support rural education and healthcare initiatives. Though the organization didn't grow as hoped, its message lives on: no one is born a loser if someone believes they can win. J.D. Vance's greatest legacy isn't in titles, books, or wealth. It's in his choice to keep moving forward even when misunderstood, criticized, or standing alone. At a hometown talk, when asked about his long-term goals, J.D. simply said, "If one day a kid like me stands up, believing they deserve to be heard, that's why I've walked this path." Whatever politics may hold for him, maybe even the White House for those who grew up like J.D., he's already a symbol, not because he's perfect, but because he faced everything that once hurt him and turned it into drive. J.D. Vance's journey shows that no starting point is too low to reach the top. No circumstance is too dark to find a spark of light. So, what about you? Is there something in your life you thought was the end, but turned out to be a beginning? Share your story in the comments below, and if you think this journey deserves to be shared, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel.